Martin Gray had always considered himself a winner. He owned dozens of companies, private jets, coastal estates, and his own contemporary art fund. His face appeared on the covers of magazines, and his name was on lists of the richest people in America. It seemed that he had achieved everything he could wish for. But everything changed in one night. A night that began with an ordinary dinner with his family and ended with a broken world. The phone call caught him by surprise. A familiar number flashed on the screen, a number from Zurich, where his most secret accounts were kept. There was an unusual tension in the banker's voice. "Mr. Gray, I'm afraid we must inform you. Your funds are blocked. All accounts. There is a warrant from an international commission. This is not a financial matter. This is a criminal investigation." For the first few seconds, he didn't even understand the meaning of the words. Blocked? Him? The man who financed presidential campaigns, giving millions to universities and hospitals? He felt as if a concrete block had suddenly been placed in his chest. "This is a mistake. This is impossible," he whispered, not noticing his wife Clara looking at him from across the table. Her eyes were alert, as if she sensed something long hidden. "Martin, what happened?" she asked, and a chill flashed in her voice that he had never heard before. He tried to smile, to brush it off, but the room already smelled of disaster. The children were silent, sensing something was wrong. And he, all-powerful just a moment ago, suddenly realized that control was slipping away. He lay awake that night. All his agreements, all the signatures that seemed legal but that someone could now interpret differently, flashed before his eyes. The faces of his former partners, once smiling, now perhaps setting a trap, flashed in his mind. His luxurious mansion, filled with masterpieces of art, seemed like a cold prison with crystal walls. At dawn, he received another blow. The headlines of the leading newspapers screamed, "Gray's empire under investigation. Suspicion of large-scale fraud and tax evasion." His photo with a wide smile was next to the word traitor. Martin threw the newspaper to the floor and felt the world burst at the seams. He was not afraid of losing money. It was more than he could spend in several lifetimes. But he saw Clara not looking him in the eye, how the children received messages from classmates full of ridicule and hatred. He felt that he was losing something much more than wealth. He was losing trust. "I did everything for you. Everything," he exclaimed as Clara coldly closed the door to their bedroom. Her footsteps echoed down the long corridor. In the mirror, he saw a man he barely recognized. His empire still stood, but its foundations were already shaking. And deep down he felt a terrible truth. This might not have been a mistake. Someone really wanted to destroy him. And then he whispered to himself, "Who did this?" The question hung in the silence, like a bullet that had not yet reached its target. In the morning, Martin woke up not to an alarm clock, but to the rhythmic hum of helicopters and cameras. News vans lined the driveway to the estate. The gates rattled with bells, and lenses gleamed like black eyes in the windows. The lawyer advised silence, the PR man advised smiling, but both strategies smacked of defeat. He went to the microphones and saw the crowd that had once called him a visionary and was now relentlessly looking for a break. Comment on the shell funds in the Caymans. Did you buy senators' votes? Why did your fund buy water rights in districts where schools were closing? The questions rained down like stones. He licked his dry lips and said, "I am cooperating with the investigation. My life is transparent." That transparency suddenly became the transparency of glass into which bricks are being thrown. The contents of the warrant leaked to the media as quickly as if it had been prepared for the headlines in advance. A former partner, Elias Stone, appeared on a talk show and said with a perfect blend of sadness and noble condemnation, "I respect Martin, but unfortunately he got lost between numbers and conscience." Martin clenched his fists, staring at the screen. It was Elias who had once persuaded him to create Hydra, a complex network of holding companies for innovative agility. It was Elias who had signed most of the risky orders when Martin had slept on the plane between two philanthropy classes. "You took me across the river to push me into the whirlpool," he thought. But out loud he said only one thing: "Prepare a lawsuit." Employees began to refuse meetings. Directors temporarily removed themselves. Friendly senators did not answer the phone. And at home, Clara was silent. She didn't make a scene, but in the silence of her footsteps, Martin could hear the verdict. That evening she had placed 2 suitcases on the table for the children and one, empty, for herself. I need space. I don't know what to believe, she said. Believe me. He almost cried out, but the years stuck on the tip of his tongue as he let her voice pass by his ears because the market doesn't wait. The special agents walked the corridors like doctors searching for a tumor in the shiny body of a house. They took down pictures, carried away servers, opened boxes of documents that left traces of his rapid rise and barely visible shadows. In the kitchen, the officer politely apologized for the noise and offered to put him in touch with his lawyer. You understand, Mr. Gray, this isn't about you personally. It's about the system. About my system, Martin thought, and felt something inside him crack. He tried to act. He called a council meeting, spoke in the language of schedules and promises, will sell non-core assets, provide liquidity, launch an audit with someone from the government. But a copy of an internal letter from 3 years ago appeared on the screen, Project Palisade, an aggressive scheme to restructure the debts of city utility companies that, on paper, saved the infrastructure, but in practice squeezed out every last penny in interest. Did you know about the social consequences? The council member asked dryly. We were building the future, Martin replied, hating how empty it sounded. When the phone rang in the night, he thought it was Clara. But it was a lawyer. The prosecutor's office is preparing charges against you personally. And, yes, Elias has entered into a cooperation agreement. The blackness rolled in like an ocean. Did he turn me in? He asked. He provided a chronology of decisions and some correspondence. You stand by your signature. Signature? He smiled bitterly. My signature is the secretary's machine. There are no machines before the law, the lawyer said and turned off the phone. In the morning, the garage door clanged. Clara had left. The children didn't look out the window. The empire was still holding on to the stock exchange, but it already looked like a crystal glass with a crack that was about to be poured boiling water. Reputation was shattered. Fortune was under arrest. The house was empty. Martin stood among the packing boxes where the ethical business awards had once been, and suddenly he admitted out loud, maybe they're right. His voice echoed off the marble, as if from a cold planet with no air. And for the first time since the war for his name began, he had lost not money, not influence, but the belief that things could still be fixed. The cafe on the waterfront, where billion-dollar mergers had once been discussed, now smelled of cheaply roasted coffee and melted sugar. A person from an unknown number had made an appointment here, Juno Patel. She came without a jacket, carrying a laptop in a cracked case, and a look that mixed fear and confidence. I worked in your internal audit. A month and I was fired. For what? Martin could no longer begin with pleasantries. For a question, she said, and put a small silver media player with a blue indicator on the table. You shouldn't watch this in the office. Cameras. Microphones. You have glass walls. They got into his old Mustang, which he kept for the sake of memories, and drove under a bridge where shadows intertwined. Juno plugged in the media player. Logs started running on the screen, not timelines, but scars. Hydra was not just a network of holding companies. It was a living organism, trained to circumvent regulations like water circumvents rocks. Transfers through charitable foundations, 97% of which went to administrative expenses, single bidder tenders, offshore credit lines secured by the very heir of the future. All of this was signed with his electronic key, automatic, delegated, but legally his. Elias ran it from the inside. He created an algorithm to route transactions, tied it to your travels so that the signatures match time zones. When you're in Tokyo, it looks like Tokyo expenses. When you're in Denver, it looks like a Colorado water utility restructuring. He made you a geographic stamp, Juno swallowed. Why are you helping? Martin asked. Because I live in a city where your project raised water rates so much that my mother stopped buying fruit. And because I want the truth to be complete, not Stone's version. He flipped through the files like old letters that smelled of ashes. And he came across a document from 10 years ago, a letter to himself, a draft of a speech to investors. Growth requires a gray area. The law is slow. Our duty is to outrun the law for the sake of future consumers. The lines rang like a bell. He was no mere victim. He had once blessed a principle, and the principle had given birth to a system. Did I write that? He whispered. Yes, but you didn't have children then, Juno replied. He sighed and felt the stones in his chest move apart, making room not for excuses but for shame. "There's one more thing," she said, and sent a recording of a private meeting to the screen where noise works like smoke. Elias is discussing with someone in a dark suit the sale of Helios, Martin's clean energy asset, to a government contractor for pennies once the charges are filed. "We'll take him out of the game. He'll become a toxic brand. The money's in a safe harbor." A voice like the laughter of ice. For the first time in days, maybe years, Martin felt something like clarity. This wasn't just atonement. This was rating disguised as morality. "What do you want in return?" he asked sharply, running through the usual mechanics of bargaining. "That you go all the way. No PR. No buying silence. And that you tell the camera not just about them, but about yourself." He looked out the window, where the water was crashing against the pilings, and suddenly saw in its movements not chaos but a path, a line between who he was and who he could become. "Okay," he said, "but it will hurt." "Pain is a signal that you are alive," Juno replied. And in that simple phrase there was hope, not rosy, but solid, like the concrete of a bridge that still holds above the water. The congressional hearing was like a courtroom and a theater all at once. With panels, flags, microphones that caught every breath. Martin stood under oath, in a dark suit that seemed to weigh a ton. The committee wanted blood. The media was a story. He was an opportunity to do something that couldn't be bought. "Mr. Gray, when did you decide that your interests were more important than the law?" asked the congressman who loved the cameras as much as the numbers. He could have answered, as he always did, never. He could have blamed Elias, the system. But Martin took a breath and said, "I once decided that the outcome was more important than the process. It was a mistake. Mine. And yes, they took advantage of it." A murmur of approval and the clink of the pen went through the room. "Go ahead." The congresswoman nodded, her eyes showing neither mercy nor anger, only curiosity for the truth. He opened the folders, the same ones Juno had brought, and laid them out like cards in a final game. "Here's the Hydra algorithm. Here are the letters I didn't read, but was responsible for. Here's the audio of my partner negotiating to sell a public asset for nothing. I'm not exonerated. But if we stop at my name, we'll give the system to the next Martin or Elias. Do you understand that you're signing a sentence for yourself?" The lawyer whispered, touching his sleeve. "I understand," he replied, not even turning his head. Elias called him during the break. His voice was honeyed with that old touch of brotherhood. "Martin, let's make a deal. You get a fine, I get a smooth landing. Helios will go under the wing of the state, and you'll be back in the game in a year or two." "The world forgets." "The world forgets, but children don't," Martin said. "Don't be a hero. Heroes are unprofitable assets. Today is yes. Tomorrow is a different economy." "You forgot how to count," Elias hissed, and hung up the phone. That evening he recorded his address. Without music, without editing, in a room with white walls. "My name is Martin Gray. I built an empire and allowed it to become above the law. I'm not alone, but I'll start with myself." He talked about Hydra, about philanthropy as a cover, about the laziness of conscience that he confused with trust in the team. Then he talked about the deal with the prosecutor's office. He admits negligence and a series of transactions, transfers the bulk of his personal assets to a compensation fund for affected communities and employees, transfers Helios to an independent trust with open reporting, gives up his positions on all boards, and asks the court, not for mercy, but for justice. Clara arrived late, when the news tapes were already recording the metrics. She stood in the doorway, tired, beautiful in her silence. "I was watching," she said. "Were you telling the truth?" "Yes. For the first time in a long time, I guess." She sat down opposite and was silent for a long time, as if listening to another internal channel. "The kids asked if we were poor now." He smiled crookedly. "We are more honest now." "That's not an option in the school textbook." She smiled too, but her eyes were moist. "It will be an option," he replied. That night he lay awake, not from panic, but from the strange silence in which something old was dying so that the new could have a chance. The judge had looked at him through his glasses in the morning, as if at a complex formula. "You're offering a lot. Why should I believe you?" "Because this is the first time I've asked for nothing in return." The sentence was neither sweet nor fatal, a suspended sentence with real restrictions, community service, a lifetime ban on corporate leadership, and supervision of a compensation fund. In essence, it was the end of old Martin. All or nothing, turned out to be all for the sake of something else. And when he left court, for the first time, he didn't feel like covering himself with his glasses against the light. He left the city not in a motorcade, but in the same Mustang in which he had once hidden the flash drive under the bridge. The road led through districts where his companies had once measured the profitability of air and sun, and now he measured silence. He stopped at schools where the compensation fund worked, new filters for the water supply, scholarships for children studying to be water engineers. Not his name on the wall, but reports with numbers available to everyone on their phones. When someone asked, "Why are you doing this if everyone decided you were guilty anyway?" he would answer, "Because I was a judge too, and I had no right." One evening he returned to the city museum, where Gray's Hall once hung. Now it had a different name. His paintings were sold. The proceeds went to rebuild libraries in the towns where he had once raised rates. He stood in front of a blank wall and imagined the canvases, and for the first time, he didn't regret it. Juno stood next to him. She no longer worked in auditing, but in a non-profit organization that taught cities not to sell themselves for a line of credit. "You know," she said, "the hardest thing is not to expose a scheme. The hardest thing is not to start a new one after it's been exposed." He nodded. "I don't build empires anymore. I repair bridges." Clara didn't turn back right away. They were choosing new words, like people who have just learned a new language. She had seen him go to public hearings without cameras, refuse paid lectures, and work night shifts with engineers, buttoning his hard hat over his gray hair. The kids argued with him about ethics, and he listened, not wasting time chasing the next deal. Can the past be redeemed? He asked himself as he placed on the table another fund report, where every cent had the name of the person to whom he had given back the path to water or light. Maybe not. But you can change the future not from a position of strength, but from a position of guilt. Once Elias wrote to him, "In short, the world forgets. Get back in the game." He stared at the message for a long time and deleted it without replying. In the stillness of the screen, he realized a simple thing. Not every battle is worth winning, where you once again become what you were afraid to be. That same day, Martin gave up the remaining dividends, converting them into a scholarship pool for graduate students writing dissertations on the ethics of markets. "It won't change the world," said a journalist friend. "The world changes more slowly than the stock market," he replied and smiled without a shadow for the first time in a long time. On the embankment, where it all began, the waves were again beating against the piles. He sat down on the cold bench, feeling not an emptiness in his chest, but an open window. The sky was darkening, and the lights of the city, gathered in one line, seemed to him a message from a distant constellation. You are not your assets. You are your decisions. He thought about simple questions that now sounded louder than any toast at a gala dinner. Can you be rich and honest? Which is more important, truth or success? Can you redeem the past? And is it obligatory for everyone who can to try? There were no answers, and for the first time this did not frighten him. He stood up, heard footsteps. Clara. She did not take his arm, but she did not retreat either. "Let's go," she said simply. They walked along the water, and Martin thought that the truth was cutting cold, but it also illuminated the shore. And somewhere far away, beyond the city lights, a dawn was already being born that no one could buy. And this is the only wealth that is always divided in half when you share it.